know Stacy and others will get to know her today. She's a good friend of mine, and she's a rebel at heart. So she's all about disrupting traditional mindsets and thinkings in organizations. And she's going to teach us today how to crack the code on growing your business. So please welcome Stacy to the stage. We play a quick video and then we go to the presentation itself.
So we're going to do a little exercise. A lot of people talk about mindfulness, so we're going to tap into some mindfulness. This is a little bit about the feels, I know, so don't roll your eyes. I'm not a yoga teacher. I teach Zumba, so if you want to do that, we can do that right now too. But instead we're going to go through a little bit of an exercise. I want you to close your eyes and think about the very best time in your life. Not your professional life, but your life in general. I want you to go there. I want you to think and feel how it feels to sit there. So I want you to smell what it smells like, taste what it tastes like, if that's applicable. Food is good, right? So maybe it tastes like something. I want you to feel the sun on your skin or feel the rain. I want you to absorb the energy around you. Who are the human beings that you were with? And who are the people that had an impact on you? I want you to sit there for just a second and really absorb what it feels like to be in that space. Everybody got it? Okay. So I'm gonna tell you about my favorite time in my life. I was raised differently than most people. I was raised by my grandparents, and every summer in June, my grandparents, who didn't expect to raise a 10-year-old at the time, sent me off to my grandmother in Georgia. So quite frankly, they could have a break, right? So they needed a break. So I would go down to Georgia for a month. And when I've done this exercise with life coaches and other people, what I recognized is it was probably the best time of my life. And I'll tell you why. So I would get up every morning, not totally distant from this visual. We're in the middle of Gainesville, Georgia. I didn't wear shoes for 30 days, that's no lie. We would go out, we had jobs to do, we had responsibilities. We got dirty all day long. I think I would go 3 days without taking a shower, but we did jump in the lake or the pond or whatever, right? That's how we got clean, relatively. I was with my friends. I felt like I had a family. The sun was on my skin every single day. It was an amazing and beautiful time for me as a kid, for a kid that didn't really grow up like other kids did. So today I'm going to talk about how I have built a code, a methodology around leadership and organizational design and development based on really the feels, right? How it feels to sit in an organization. And that code breaks down as an acronym, code's an acronym, for how I break down how it feels to people and how do you construct something to feel a certain way to people that's a little bit different and is really about the employee experience that we've been talking about today. All that stuff on. Like, here's your technology challenge. You need to switch between two things today. Awesome. Thank you. So back in that field, some of the things that were resonant or not, because this is not going to work. I can flow, it's okay, but this isn't working. So does culture matter? Does the feels at all matter? To me, culture is how it feels when you walk through the door of an organization, right? It's just like I said, taking you back to that experience. What did it feel like to sit there? We've all had organizations where it feels great. You walk in super energized. Has anybody had the opposite, where I had a job one time where when I smelled the smell of the building, it made me physically nauseous? Right? I'm not kidding. That happens, right? So does this matter? So if you look at firms of endearment, yes, it matters. It matters to CEOs because there is a 750% investor return versus 128 investor return for the S&P. firms of endearment. People and organizations that care about people. So it does translate to results, right? That feels. So the first C is to connect deeply, right? So when I go back to my experience in Georgia, the thing that was the most resonant to me was the human connections that I made while I was there. The people that I connected with. These were not my family, really. These were extensions and friends of family, but it really didn't matter. We connected deeply with one another. And if you look at organizations, people buy into their leader before they buy into the vision. They buy the human. So yes, mission, vision, values, those are all important, but it really is irrelevant if they don't buy the human being that it's coming from. And that's the CEO, but it's also their direct leader. So I'm going to dive into some tactics today because I can sit up here and talk about theory all day long, but it doesn't really matter. So here are the things that I have found that when I've been in an organization, and I just, for those of you who don't know me, I have been in the Valley for 20 years. I've done about eight startup companies, high growth companies, 40% year-over-year growth. Ulthera was the most notable. We sold for a record multiple to Merz. That was about 3.5 years ago. But I've also done some advisory work with some really interesting organizations, one of which recently was for Sheriff Penzone. So Sheriff Penzone asked us to come in and look at how do you change a culture from Joe Arpaio, yes, from Joe Arpaio, over to this side of the fence, right? It was a big job, but these are the things that we talked about with Penzone and the supervisory board, because these are the things that we suggested for them to do as well. So first of all, we told, as a good example, Sheriff Penzone to tell his story, to talk to people, to go out and connect with other humans on a deep level and be vulnerable about the fact that he was terrified that he was not going to get anything done in the next 4 years because it was such a radical shift from where the organization was to where he wanted it to be. But in being authentic in those conversations, he'd have a much better opportunity of affecting change. Be vulnerable first, so one person at a time. And you are one person. I think most of us agree in this room that gone are the days that we're one human at work and we're another human at home. You are the same person, by the way. So me standing up here today is the same person that gets in front of 80 women every Tuesday and shakes my ass. I'm like the same person, right? I'm not that person and now I'm this person. It's like, here I am, right? So that is part of building an authentic culture. Really listen, that one we know, but I like to emphasize because that's hard for people. Building trust, being servant, having servant leadership philosophy. And then the we. Have you ever listened to any CEO talk? Really listen to them? Matt Likens, who was my CEO at Ulthera, would actually count the number of I's in a thank you from a candidate and say, nope, it was 5 I's. We can't hire that person. There was not a we in that email. There was all about them, and that's not the type of people that we want to hire. No joke, we did not hire definitely a handful of people because of the thank you email. No kidding. So listen to people's conversation and listen to people's language, right? Because they're listening to yours, whether you realize it or not. So 65% of employees would take a new leader over a pay raise. That to me is an unbelievable. We talk about compensation all the time. The reality is if somebody had a highly functional leader, that's what they would prefer. So O is own your shit. So again, back in the fields of Georgia, we all had a job. And it was expected that we did the jobs that we were supposed to do. Now how that doesn't translate to my own home and my 3 teenagers today, I'm still working on that, right? Because not everybody owns their shit in my house, that's for sure. But ultimately, it is about that ownership, right? And people feeling like they have ownership of something in your organization. Do they really own it? So vulnerability sounds like the truth. It feels like courage. And that is, it is very courageous to be vulnerable. leadership is about giving credit, taking criticism. Have any of you read or are familiar with the 4 Agreements? Some of you? I read that when I was 26 and it shifted my perspective immensely when someone was coming at me about something. That something is about them. It has very little to do with me, right? It doesn't mean that they're not talking to me about something that I did or I can affect, but how they're showing up to you is all about where they're sitting, their insecurity, their challenges, their concerns that day. Maybe they woke up and, I don't know, I woke up one day and my son was standing over the top of me, 14-year-old boy, and he threw up on me in my own bed. Like maybe he had that morning, right? Maybe the person in front of you had that morning. And that's where they sit, right? I know, kids are disgusting, right? 14, I'm like, you're 6 foot tall. Can you go to the bathroom instead of coming and seeing me? No. Okay. Forgive, that's a hard one. It's a hard one for leaders. Be patient, make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything right, by the way. And learn every single day. Employees are more likely to take a job with more autonomy 2.5 times more often than a job with influence. So sit on that. That's like a little bit of a complicated thing to think about. People want to be autonomous. They want to have control of their own destiny. How many of you have read the book Drive by Daniel Pink? Right? Autonomy is a big factor in people feeling engaged. So D is drive autonomy. So again, thinking about where you were at the best part of your life, did you have control over your own stuff? Probably, right? I was 10 years old and I had 100% control of my day. I knew what was expected of me, but then I was able to do that however I saw fit. Did somebody come to me and say, you didn't feed the horses the right way? No, nobody cared because the horses got fed. Didn't really matter, the horses got fed, right? But we as leaders get caught up in the how and the when and all of the little parameters that we want things to happen in out of control. CEOs have control issues. There's an aha moment, right? They are all mostly control freaks. It's really hard to let go of control, and leaders have that same challenge. So driving autonomy is really being clear and then taking a step back. Being totally clear about what you want the end result to be, and then stepping back. And then, if it's not the outcome that you were looking for, giving feedback exactly in the moment. So another Matt Likens story, he was one of my best leaders. I was sitting in a boardroom one time, and I was probably about 3 months into the job as the head of people for Altera. And at the break, he said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah." Matt Likens, if you've never met him, is like 6'4", pretty intimidating, big guy, but he is the softest soul. So we went into a side room. We were only about an hour into the board meeting, and he said to me, "You're acting really weird." I said, "I don't, okay." I'm like, "Am I?" He's like, "Yes." And then he talked to me about how he was experiencing me in that moment. And he said, "So what's going on?" And I said, "Well, quite frankly, a room full of old white guys scares the shit out of me, right? Like I get really insecure, and at the time I was in my late 30s. Am I good enough? Am I gonna be good enough to contribute? Are they gonna look at me and think that I'm valuable?" Like everybody has those insecurities, right? And so in the moment, the magic for me was he said to me, "Cut it out. Like I hired you, I believe in you, you were the right person for this job. Go back in there and just do you, be you." And that, for the rest of that board meeting, which was another like 6 hours plus the dinner, everybody's favorite board meetings, I just was me. And it made all the difference for myself in my trajectory at Altera, as well as their experience with me. So really, giving that real-time feedback, giving people the opportunity to change behavior as quickly as you addressed it. If you waited for my one-on-one with him 2 weeks later, I would not have been able to change my behavior in that room. So, but the check-ins are important. And then again, don't focus on the whens and the hows, and focus on the results. I guess I don't need my engagement ring, someone that's not working. So that's all great, right? But when we go talk to CEOs, what do CEOs care about? Revenue, results, right? So this is my statistic, 0% of companies with great culture succeed without results. Because great culture is great, and it can drive great results, but they're not always one-for-one as far as a relationship, right? So execute every day is the key. Execute every day. Get a little, Shannon's smiling, she's like, it's probably a little four agreements, right? Do your best every day. It's really important to execute. So as we think about that, think about this. We have lots of CEOs that I've worked with, that we've worked with, that tell me what they want the culture to be. I want it to be this, I want it to be this, I want to be that. And when I saw this quote a year ago, I thought, wow, well that's profound given where I was at the time. But really it is the behavior that anybody's willing to tolerate. That is the definition of culture. Because it is not your best. It is your very worst behavior, unfortunately, that people judge you by. And if you have a leader, I'm going to pick on CFOs really quick, or chief revenue officers, salespeople, right? Everybody likes to make excuses for those people. The CFO is a jerk because they have to be a jerk. Not really. They're responsible for the revenue and the financials, but it's not a pass. Oh, well, our head of sales, he's an ass, but he gets the number. Well, that's not really an excuse. Because if you accept it, that is your culture. You accept people being an ass to other people, especially as a leader. It's not acceptable. So in execute every day, what do? We set the stretch goal. BHAG, whatever you want to call it. Set the stretch goal. Set the goal where people can feel like it's achievable, 80% achievable, totally doable, but it is a stretch. Create a rhythm, right? I talked about mindfulness, finding your grounding. When I teach, one of the things that I do is we spend the last 2 minutes setting an intention, especially when I teach at 5:15 in the morning cycle, they're half awake, and then by the end of class, they're totally awake. But we set an intention. We take a breath and we set an intention. That's a ritual for people that they can hold on to. High growth organizations change very rapidly. And if people don't have a floor of some rhythm or expectation, they get lost. And that's when you have disengagement, active disengagement, typically. They're out looking for something else. Behaviors define the culture. If you have values, how many of you have values? Probably almost everybody, right? How many of you have behaviors to define those values? Some of you, right? It's less frequent that we talk about what do we expect from people, what are the behaviors we expect from people, right? Continuous feedback, align process to define outcomes, and always retrospective. Always refine and reflect on a project, on a meeting, on a summit, right? Probably after this, we'll talk about what we could do better, how we can do better, how we can get more people in Arizona more involved in this conversation. But the retrospective is just as important. So currently I am building a business called the Rebel Code, and what I'm doing is I'm actually going in and partnering right now with 3 different CEOs, and I go in and create a roadmap for the CEOs and the executive team. I do a diagnostic in their roadmap, and then many times what we're going to be doing is finding someone in the business to lead the people stuff. And there's a couple of reasons why. One, in my opinion, there's not enough exceptional people talent here in the Valley, and we need to build more. Number two, if you come out of human resources, it's really challenging to get the trust of the business. So the model is based on the fact that somebody from the business already understands the business, and they don't have to build the trust that they do understand the business, right? And then we will coach and mentor that person, guide that person through the roadmap, and hopefully have them become a chief people officer of that company as they grow and develop. I do have an engagement where I have a generalist that I'm doing that with. She is super motivated, super excited, but not ready. So we're doing that with her as well, and we're following this code from a leadership development standpoint, but also doing a lot of work around the blocking and tackling to build a high growth organization. So any questions? And I think are we doing another discussion? Yeah. Okay. Any questions that I can answer? It was very profound, I know. We can Zoom it too, that's fine. We can get up and do a Latin dance.
Any questions for Stacy?
So think about what are the challenges that your organization is facing as it's growing. Hopefully your organization is growing, right? Otherwise, it's not a good sign. You may just look for something else. But think about what the challenges your organization are facing, with your different levels of management, how your employees are reacting to those changes happening in the organization, and how you can apply some of those codes, some of the code methodology to re-engage with these employees or to maintain that high level of engagement. So we take about 8-10 minutes to do so as well, and then we'll go to the next presentation.
Yeah, think about the things that we've talked about today. What do you feel is your biggest obstacle to build your business?
I have a question for you, Stacey. One of the things that I think we all get stuck is that there's a lot of noise. Trying to do this is wonderful, but yet we are also surrounded by people that kind of ping you all the time and go, hey, I need your attention on this, and I need that, and you can't focus on this right now. How do you stop that?
So that's why we built a roadmap, right? So we use OKRs, so objectives and key results, for a couple of reasons. When we're dealing with revenue-driven people, OKRs, it's very easy for me to translate what we're doing in the people space directly to a business result. And then it's much harder for someone to come and tell me, what you're doing doesn't matter, I need you to focus on this. Now, from a practical standpoint, for example, we have a client that has somebody doing recruiting and generalist work. That doesn't work. What is always second? Recruiting. Recruiting is always second to that. Because what's on fire? The fire that someone's hair is running through your door with an urgent issue, right? And so your talent pipeline dwindles, and then you're not meeting project timeline, and then you're not filling sales seats, and you're not meeting the revenue goal, right? They're all directly related. So it really is a little bit about organizational design. How do you block and tackle that within the individuals within an organization? But then it's also having OKRs where you can directly correlate strategic business results to whatever the factors that you're doing within the people space. So leadership development as a good one, which I know you focus on, right? If we have a leadership deficiency, which happens a lot in high growth companies, between senior leadership and next line leadership, that gap is usually huge because you have individual contributors that have been promoted. If you don't fix that gap, your revenue will suffer, your project capability will suffer, and you will churn out much larger parts of your intellectual capital than you probably recognize. So those are the things that we talk about to correlate. Again, you gotta CEOs speak to business results, and then you can tie projects to those business results, which makes it much more difficult for someone to say, hey, that's not a priority, I need you to plan the company party. You know, I think you have an executive assistant. Thank you for the offer, and we'll be happy to be engaged in that process down the road, right? So that's what helps you have those conversations. Thank you. So think about, yeah, in the conversations, think about of the things that we've talked about today, about autonomy, about getting shit done, owning your shit, all that stuff. For you, what's your big issue? Because that's the thing that you probably need to tackle first.
We'll take the next 5 minutes or so just to discuss among ourselves about those topics.